Hey BookTube, it's Samantha, and if you haven't watched my vlog yet, you can tell I changed my hair. What's super awesome about this hair is like it looks black at first, which I love, but then under the light you can see that it goes from blue to purple, which is like super awesome. Isn't that so pretty? I love it. We're not here to talk about my hair, we're here to talk about The Chalkman by C.J. Tudor. I just finished reading the book and I instantly knew I kind of wanted to just do a video about my thoughts on the book. This is going to be very spoilery. If you want just a general overview of my thoughts, you can check out my vlog, and it does give updates of what I think of the book, but there's nothing spoilery in it, so I think that would be the best way for you to find out if it's a book that'd be fitting for you without all the spoilers. So now that we're done with that, let me tell you about the book. So this book is told from the perspective of a man named Eddie Adams. And the book goes back and forth between him narrating when he's a kid, when this first major death happens in the mid 1980s, and then present time, which is 2016, where he's a grown adult and his past is kind of coming up again. When I read the blurb about this book, here's what it said. And this is also how the beginning of the book starts. It's like the very first page. None of us ever agreed on the exact beginning. Was it when we started drawing the chalk figures, or when they started to appear on their own? Was it the terrible accident, or when they found the first body? So when I read that blurb, especially the part where it says, did it start when we had started drawing the chalk figures or when they started appearing on their own, it made me think that the book was going to be a little more on the supernatural side of things in terms of a thriller or horror. I wasn't quite sure where this was. I knew it was supposed to be creepy, maybe scary, but I wasn't quite sure where it fit. So that's what I went in expecting. I listened to reviews from Literary Diversions and Lala, who have both read the book, and both of them said it's better just to go into the book without knowing anything at all. So that's what I did. But I also had this expectation that it was going to be a little supernaturally and creepy. When I read this book, in the first 50 pages or so, it has that vibe that Stephen King brings in his group stories. What I keep mentioning in my vlog is that it feels like Stephen King's It. And I mention that because it's a group of friends who are 11, 12 years old, and this murder happened in the town, and then there's a bully in town that's messing with them and doing things that are not cool at all. And there's a girl in the group who's being abused by her father. So it's just it had that same feel of Stephen King's It for me. And it was a lot more of that slice of life feel rather than a spooky, creepy thriller. There is a scene where, in the very first chapter of the book, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. Because it's talking about how this girl's body is found in the woods and it's all chopped up or whatever. And someone picks up the girl's head and, takes it with them, and no one ever finds the head. And so it's oh, that's really cool. That's kind of, creepy. But then it goes to the slice of life thing, and I'm like, where did this come from? Where is it going? Maybe it'll get creepy, kind of like It, where you got those scary stories with the clown or the monster throughout the book. That didn't necessarily happen. I mean, there were maybe 3 scenes that were told in really graphic detail for about 2 sentences. and like it would have this creepy vibe around it, and then it just kind of like got washed out. And I'm like, wait, that was it? A really good scene that was written in the book is where the narrator as a boy sees this girl and he thinks that she's really cute and everything, and then as he's looking at her, she get like one of the fair rides gets unhooked or is damaged or something, and it like falls on him and it completely disfigures her face, and she like it cuts off her leg and everything, like she's seriously disfigured from it. I'm like, oh wow, dude, that's like really intense. And that lasted like a page or two, and then it was like, so here's my life and I'm just going about and I live with this person, and yeah, I was a teacher and I knew this teacher back when I was a kid. And it was like, okay, what happened to the creepy thing? So that was a little disappointing to me, because that's what I was looking for, was more of that creepy stuff. And after the 50-page mark, between, I want to say 50 to like 125 or so, was when I thought, okay, here comes the creepy part. Here comes the part where you're not really sure what's going on, because the narrator would say that he would be waking up and then he's seeing like people who are dead, but they're like sitting in his living room or they're standing outside his window. And it's like, okay, are they really there or not? And then there's like a chalk man that's drawn on his driveway, and it's like, oh, it's just a dream. And then he wakes up the next morning and it's still there. So it's like, oh gosh, like what's really going on? And that kind of goes back and forth. And I think that's the one thing that wasn't really answered. Like the author tried to pull it off as he's sleepwalking, but I don't know. It wasn't necessarily satisfying for me. And then at the very end of the book, they kind of play it off as like he might be like starting to decompensate because his father had Alzheimer's, and so they kind of make it think like he's also developing Alzheimer's, but that wouldn't explain all these things happening at night. Like, I guess he could have been sleepwalking. I don't know. It didn't seem to wrap up very nicely. So like those parts were interesting. I thought like, okay, here we're getting this spooky stuff. And then about the last third of the book, it actually started reading like a typical mystery where you've got the detective and he's asking people questions and he's following certain trails, and he's like, oh, I think this happened, and he's like putting out theories and whatnot. So the last third of the book feels very much like a traditional mystery. I'm like, oh, okay, here we are, mystery. But I mean, it was still good. Like, I still wanted to know what happened. You know, I didn't have a hard time picking the book up by any means. I read this book in like 2 days, maybe 2.5, like because I started a little bit of it a while ago, and then I read a bunch of it yesterday and then finished it today. That wasn't difficult for me. It was just, I think I kind of gave this a lower rating because I went in with a certain expectation already, and it didn't pull through at all. I will say that one of the things that I did like about it, when I put aside my preconceptions of the book, was that there are a few like mini mysteries throughout where it's like, well, what happened with this? What happened with this? How about this person? And all of the answers are, lack of a better term, are simplified. They're something that's realistic in life. Sometimes with mysteries, they get very convoluted, and it'll be kind of like a Scooby-Doo mystery where it's this way far out character that we haven't even been introduced to or was only around for like 2 pages. But in this book, one of the good things about it was like, okay, that totally makes sense. That could be real life, something that would happen. So once I put aside the fact that there's no supernatural stuff in it, I did really like that touch. I'm not gonna necessarily go into all the spoilers about that in case you are interested in reading the book. I'm not gonna like completely At least I don't think I'm going to completely ruin it. I hope I don't. But I did really like that touch, that all of the answers, all the conclusions were really simple and realistic to real life. But on the other hand, there were times where it really felt like the author was talking directly to me, and they're like, you shouldn't assume that it's going to be difficult. You shouldn't always assume this and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of felt like she was spelling it out a little too much, and I was just like, just let me enjoy it. Like, if I want something convoluted, like, there's nothing wrong with that in a mystery. Like, if it just seems really impossible, but it has all these nice little twists and turns, like, there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's also nothing wrong with having something that's very realistic, a real explanation of what could have happened or what did happen. And then when it came to the very end of the book, I don't know if this was a twist or not, because I saw it coming a long time ago. I'll put a little spoiler thing in the corner, because like I already know I said spoilers, but this is like a spoiler, so I'll put a little spoiler box here. But at the very beginning of the book, the narrator talks about how he likes to collect things, and it won't necessarily be anything meaningful or whatnot, but he likes to collect things. And at the very beginning of the book, in the very first chapter, we hear about this person, not necessarily the narrator, but we hear about someone going into the woods and seeing this girl's body all dismembered and taking the head with themselves. And as soon as the narrator had said that he likes to collect things, I'm like, well, he took the head. Like, that was obvious to me. But the author waited until like the very last part of the book, as if that was the overall real big question. Like, well, who took the head then? I know who took the head, like on page 20 out of 277. Like, it wasn't that big of a twist. The other stuff with who killed the girl, I should have seen it coming, because like the author said, you know, don't assume it's something more complicated, you know, don't make assumptions. And so like my head was trying to make it more difficult than it was, when in all actuality, once the mystery was explained, it was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I could see that makes a lot of sense. One of the other things about this book, which I don't know how I feel about it, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm also not saying it was a good thing, was that it wasn't necessarily just one person who did all of this stuff, or even just a couple of people. It was multiple people in the town who did pretty bad things. Some of them were not as bad as others, but it was multiple people. It was like 5 or 6 people who were all involved in like the mini mysteries throughout the book. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, on one hand, you know, sometimes it's really hard to tie all the stuff that happened to one specific person. But I just felt like when I was reading the book, it was like, okay, we're wrapping up this one, wrapping up this one, wrapping up this one. They didn't seem very tied together. I think that's my biggest problem with that, is I like the concept that it's more realistic to not expect it to be all done by one person. But the other problem you run into is that because there's so many mysteries done by different people, they don't really mesh as well together. I think the author did as best as she could to do that. Honestly, like, the book was well written, and I think she did, like, I really do think she did the best she could to try and intertwine them. So that's why I'm like, it's not necessarily bad, not necessarily good, because I feel like she did do a really good try to try and make it all cohesive. Overall, if you haven't seen my Goodreads review, I gave this 3 stars according to Goodreads. I'm kind of on the fence about doing 3.5, but it's kind of more of a solid 3 for me. I would recommend this book to people who typically read literary fiction or contemporary fiction, and they just want a little bit more of a mystery to it. Definitely do not go in thinking it's supernatural, because it's not. It's 100% a realistic atmosphere. It's got some nightmare aspects to it, but they're very, very short. They last like maybe, like I said, a couple sentences at a time. The only exception would be the fairground scene that happens with the girl with the disfigurement. That's the only one that goes on for probably like a couple of pages. But otherwise, like, if horror is not really your thing, I recommend it. I think it's more of a... I'm finding the more books that I'm reading trying to be scared, the more confused I am with how to classify books. So I've actually been thinking about maybe doing a video where I actually research into different categories of horror and mystery and thrillers, so that I can give a better explanation of the books I read, so you can find out for yourself if it's something you want to read or not. Like I said, it's not really nightmare inducing. If you feel like you get scared easily by books, I probably wouldn't read it at night. Like, I read it at night and I was fine, but like if you're like, oh, I don't want to have nightmares, I don't know. It all depends on your own taste. I think you'd be fine. It's definitely not Cabin at the End of the World, that's for sure. Do not read Cabin at the End of the World at nighttime. This one, I think you could get away with. It's more mystery, slice of life, with a little bit of gory stuff, but not really. I hope that makes sense. I hope it does. If you guys want me to like actually take the time, well, you know what? I'm probably going to do it anyway, because I feel like when it comes to these scary books, I want to be able to recommend it to people without accidentally recommending it to someone who doesn't like scary stuff, and then they read it and they're like, oh my God, that was way too much. So I'm thinking maybe doing like a scare meter scale, or coming up with just doing some research so I can better recommend books to you. Let me know if you've read this book and what your thoughts on it. If you haven't read the book, is it something that you think you might read now, or maybe you wouldn't want to read? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks.